The howling wind rattled the windows of Michael Reeves' isolated cabin, but he barely noticed it anymore. After 3 years in the Colorado mountains, the constant symphony of wilderness had become white noise, background music to his solitary existence. He stared at the fireplace, watching flames dance over pine logs, casting long shadows across the room. His right hand absently traced the scarred stump where his left arm had once been, a habit he couldn't seem to break. Outside, the January blizzard raged, piling snow against the cabin walls. Weather reports warned it might be the worst storm in decades. Michael had stocked up on supplies last week, enough food, firewood, and whiskey to outlast any snowfall. He wasn't concerned about the storm. Isolation suited him just fine. Before the accident, he'd been one of the most sought-after veterinary surgeons in Denver. Now, at 42, he was a one-armed hermit living on disability checks and savings, his prestigious career nothing but painful memories. The irony wasn't lost on him, a surgeon who couldn't even button his own shirt properly anymore. Michael lifted his glass, draining the last of his whiskey, when a sound cut through the storm's roar, different from the wind or the creaking of timber. He froze, listening intently. There it was again, a scratching at his door, followed by a low, pained whine. Probably just a coyote seeking shelter, he thought. They sometimes ventured close to human dwellings during bad storms. Still, something about the sound tugged at the remnants of his veterinarian instincts. With a sigh, Michael set down his glass and crossed the room. He pulled his heavy wool coat from its hook with practiced ease, one of the many single-handed maneuvers he'd perfected, and switched on the porch light. Bracing himself against the inevitable blast of cold, he cracked open the door. The wind nearly tore it from his grasp as snow swirled into the cabin. Michael squinted into the darkness, and what he saw made him forget about the cold instantly. It wasn't a coyote. A wolf lay collapsed on his porch, half buried in snow. Not the typical gray or brown timber wolf, but one with fur the color of tarnished silver, almost glowing against the white backdrop. The animal's breaths came in shallow pants, creating small clouds in the frigid air. A dark stain matted the fur around its right flank, blood, freezing in the cold. Jesus Christ, Michael muttered. His mind raced through possibilities. Wolves rarely approached human dwellings, especially not alone, and especially not to scratch at doors. This one was clearly injured, possibly shot by a hunter or caught in a trap. The rational part of his brain screamed danger, wild animal, predator, unpredictable. But the veterinarian in him, the part he thought had died in the accident, stirred to life. The wolf's eyes locked onto Michael's, intelligent, aware, and filled with something that looked unsettlingly like desperation. Those eyes weren't entirely wild. There was something in them, something that triggered a forgotten instinct in Michael's core. "I must be out of my mind," he said, pulling the door open wider. As if understanding, the wolf attempted to stand. Its legs trembled with the effort before buckling again. A pitiful whine escaped its throat, the sound that had drawn Michael to the door in the first place. "Don't move," Michael said, surprised at how softly he spoke, as if the wolf might understand him. "You'll make it worse." He returned inside quickly, grabbing an old blanket from the closet. If he was going to do this, he'd need to move fast before the animal either succumbed to its injuries or found renewed strength to attack. When he returned, the wolf hadn't moved, its eyes following his every movement. Michael cautiously approached, blanket extended in his one hand. The wolf's ears flattened against its head, but it made no attempt to growl or snap. Its sides heaved with labored breathing. "Easy now," Michael murmured, kneeling slowly beside the massive predator. "I'm going to help you, but you've got to work with me here." In one fluid motion, he tossed the blanket over the wolf, quickly wrapping it before it could react. The animal gave a startled yelp, but remained otherwise docile as Michael gathered the bundle into his arm, staggering slightly under the weight. Inside, he laid the wrapped wolf on the rug before the fireplace. For a moment, he simply stared at what he'd done, reality sinking in. He had just brought an apex predator, wounded and unpredictable, into his home. If anyone from his former life could see him now, they'd have him committed. Yet as he unwrapped the blanket enough to expose the injured flank, the absurdity of the situation faded. Medical training took over. The wound was a deep gash, likely from a trap or fence wire, partially frozen from exposure. It needed cleaning, possibly stitches. The wolf watched him intently, its breathing steadier in the cabin's warmth, but its eyes never leaving Michael's face. There was intelligence in that gaze, an awareness that sent a shiver down his spine unrelated to the cold. "I don't know why I'm doing this," Michael told the wolf as he gathered first aid supplies. "And I definitely don't know why you chose my porch out of all the places to collapse." As he arranged his supplies, antiseptic, gauze, needle, and thread, Michael noticed something odd about the wolf's right ear. A small notch was missing from the tip, and around it, the fur grew in a perfect white circle, like a halo against the silver. It wasn't a natural marking. Someone had handled this wolf before. "You been around people?" Michael asked as he dampened a cloth. "That might explain why you're not trying to tear my throat out right now." The wolf blinked slowly, then lowered its head to rest on its paws. An unmistakable gesture of surrender or perhaps trust. Michael worked methodically, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency despite his handicap. The wolf flinched when the antiseptic touched raw flesh, but made no attempt to bite or flee. As he worked, Michael fell into an old habit, talking to his patient. "You picked the right porch, at least. 5 years ago, I could have fixed this in my sleep. Did this kind of work on everything from hamsters to tigers. Now," he glanced at his missing left arm. "Well, let's just say we both have our challenges." The wound required stitches. Michael hesitated, wondering if the wolf would tolerate the needle. To his astonishment, it remained still as he began suturing, only the occasional twitch of muscle beneath silver fur indicating discomfort. "You should be sedated for this," Michael told it. "But I don't have the right meds, and you're being a better patient than most humans I've known." As he tied off the last stitch, a strange sensation washed over him. The wolf's eyes had never left his face, and in them flickered something impossible understanding. Not just animal awareness, but comprehension. For a moment, Michael felt as though he were looking into the eyes of someone who knew him. "This is crazy," he whispered, breaking the gaze and focusing on bandaging the wound. Once finished, Michael leaned back on his heels, suddenly exhausted. The clock on the mantel read 2:17 a.m. The blizzard still raged outside, rattling the windows with renewed fury. There was no possibility of taking the wolf elsewhere tonight, even if there had been a where to take it. The nearest town was 20 miles away, and the roads would be impassable until the plows came through, likely days from now. "Looks like you're staying the night," Michael said. "I'll figure out what to do with you in the morning." He filled a bowl with water and placed it near the wolf, then retreated to his armchair, unwilling to turn his back completely on the wild animal in his living room. The wolf sniffed at the water before drinking deeply, then settled back on the blanket, its posture more relaxed but still alert. Michael intended to stay awake, to keep watch, but the warmth of the fire and the events of the night soon pulled him towards sleep. As his eyes grew heavy, the wolf's gaze held his, that same unnerving intelligence, that same impossible understanding. "What are you?" Michael murmured, just before exhaustion claimed him. He dreamed that night for the first time in months. Not the usual nightmares of screeching metal and shattering glass. The accident that took his arm replaying in endless variations. Instead, he dreamed of running through snow-covered forests, moonlight filtering through pine branches, the ground rushing beneath four powerful limbs. He dreamed of hunger and pain, of searching for something just beyond reach. He dreamed of silver fur and ancient wisdom passed through generations. When Michael woke with a start, pale morning light filtered through the curtains. The storm had passed, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. For a moment, he wondered if the events of the night had been part of his vivid dream. Then he saw the wolf. It was standing by the window, its profile outlined against the snow's cape beyond. The silver fur captured the morning light, giving the animal an almost ethereal quality. At Michael's movement, it turned, regarding him with those same intelligent eyes. The notched ear with its perfect white circle twitched slightly. "You're really here," Michael said, his voice rough with sleep. The wolf took a step toward him, moving with surprising grace for an injured animal. Michael tensed instinctively, but there was no aggression in the approach. The wolf simply stopped a few feet away, looking at him expectantly. Before Michael could decipher what the look meant, his satellite phone rang, the sound harsh in the quiet cabin. The wolf's ears flattened, but it didn't retreat. Michael answered, still watching the wolf. "Hello, Michael? It's Sheriff Dawson. Just checking that you weathered the storm all right." "I'm fine, Sheriff. Thanks for checking." Michael had met the local sheriff only a handful of times since moving to the mountains, but the man made a point of calling isolated residents after severe weather. "Glad to hear it. Listen, while I've got you, keep an eye out, would you? We've had reports of something taking livestock from a couple of farms in the valley. Thought it might be a mountain lion, but tracks suggest wolves." Michael's gaze locked with the silver wolves. "Wolves," he repeated. "Yeah, unusual too. We don't typically have wolf problems around here. Game warden thinks it might be a pack that's moved down from Wyoming. Anyway, just a heads up. They typically avoid people, but no harm in being cautious." "I appreciate the warning," Michael said, unable to look away from the wolf standing in his living room. "When did these livestock incidents start?" "Just this past week. 3 sheep from the Monroe place and a calf from Old Baker's farm. Let me know if you see anything suspicious." After hanging up, Michael stared at the wolf, which hadn't moved during the entire conversation. "Suspicious," he said. "Like harboring the prime suspect in my living room?" The wolf lowered its head, and Michael could have sworn its expression looked almost guilty. Michael stared at the wolf, its silver coat gleaming in the morning light. The animal returned his gaze steadily, showing none of the fear or aggression that should have been present in a wild predator confined in a human dwelling. The sheriff's warning about livestock killings echoed in his mind, placing him in an impossible position. "I can't keep you here," he said finally. "You understand that, right?" The wolf tilted its head, that unnerving intelligence still present in its amber eyes. Michael sighed and ran his hand through his uncombed hair. "I patched you up. You're not bleeding anymore. The storm's passed. Time for you to go back where you belong." He walked to the door and opened it, gesturing outside where the world had transformed into a crystalline landscape of untouched snow. The wolf didn't move, instead looking from the open door to Michael, then down at its bandaged flank. "Don't give me that look," Michael said. "I'm harboring a fugitive here. An actual predator suspected of killing livestock. I'm already the weird hermit with one arm. I don't need to add wolf sympathizer to my reputation." The wolf took a tentative step toward the door, then stopped, looking back at the warm fireplace. It was subtle, but Michael caught the slight tremble in the animal's legs. Though the wound was stitched, the wolf was still weak from blood loss and exposure. "Damn it," Michael muttered, closing the door. "One more day. That's it. Until you're stronger." He couldn't explain the relief he felt when the wolf padded back to the blanket by the fire and settled down, resting its head on its paws. Michael watched it for a long moment, then shook his head and went to the kitchen to make coffee. As the coffee brewed, Michael leaned against the counter, trying to make sense of the situation. He'd spent the last 3 years avoiding both people and animals, determined to wallow in his isolation after the accident that had claimed his arm and career. Now, in the span of a single night, he'd welcomed a wild wolf into his home and was actually talking to it as if it understood him. "I'm losing my mind," he said to the empty kitchen. From the living room came a soft whine, as if in disagreement. Michael returned to the living room with his coffee and a plate of leftover venison. He placed the meat on the floor near the wolf, which sniffed it cautiously before eating with surprising delicacy for a starving predator. "I need to call you something," Michael said, settling into his armchair. "Can't keep thinking of you as the wolf, if you're staying." The wolf looked up from the empty plate, licking its chops. "How about Silver?" "Too obvious." The wolf's ears flattened slightly. "Yeah, I think so too." "Luna?" "No, too." "I don't know. Expected." As Michael considered names, he found himself drawn to the distinctive white circle around the notched ear. "Ghost," he suggested, "because of that mark on your ear. Looks like a little ghost." The wolf's ears perked up, head tilting slightly. "Ghost it is," then, Michael decided, surprised by how natural it felt to interpret the animal's reactions as responses. Throughout the day, Michael kept expecting the wolf, Ghost, to display some aggression or try to escape. Instead, it seemed content to rest by the fire, occasionally watching Michael with those unsettling, intelligent eyes as he went about his daily routine. By mid-afternoon, Michael had almost forgotten the abnormality of sharing his space with a wild predator. He was sorting through his dwindling medical supplies, making a mental inventory of what he'd need to restock, when he heard a vehicle approaching. The sound was distinctive, the rumble of a truck struggling through snow-covered roads. Ghost heard it too, rising quickly to its feet, ears alert and eyes fixed on the door. "Relax," Michael said, though he felt a spike of anxiety himself. Probably just Sheriff Dawson making his rounds. Through the front window, Michael spotted a familiar red pickup making its way up the long driveway to his cabin. It was Sam Turner, owner of the local general store and one of the few people Michael had any regular contact with. Ghost retreated to the shadows near the back wall, ears flat against its head. "You've got good instincts," Michael told the wolf. "Stay out of sight. I'll get rid of him." The truck came to a stop, and Sam emerged, bundled in a heavy coat and carrying a box. Michael opened the door before he could knock. "Sam, wasn't expecting a delivery today." "Not on the schedule," Sam agreed, stamping snow from his boots. "But I figured you might need supplies after that monster storm. Roads are clear enough now. Thought I'd check on the folks up this way." "Appreciate it," Michael said, blocking the doorway with his body. Sam peered over Michael's shoulder, trying to look inside. "You gonna invite me in? It's freezing out here." Michael hesitated, aware of ghosts somewhere in the shadows behind him. "Actually, I'm in the middle of something. Let me just take that box." "Come on, Michael. I drove all the way up here. At least to offer me a cup of coffee before I head back." Sam had always been kind to Michael, never pitying him for his disability or judging his self-imposed isolation. Refusing him entry would seem suspicious at best, ungrateful at worst. "Fine," Michael relented, stepping aside. "Coffee. Quick one." Sam entered, setting the box on the table. "Place looks the same. Still refusing to decorate, I see." Michael glanced around nervously, but Ghost was nowhere in sight. "You know me. Minimalist." As Michael prepared coffee, Sam warmed himself by the fire. "So, you hear about the livestock killings down in the valley?" Michael's hand tensed around the coffee pot. "Sheriff mentioned something about it." "Yeah, Well, Baker and Monroe are fit to be tied. Wildlife Service confirmed it was wolves. They're talking about organizing a hunting party if there are any more attacks. Hunting party? Michael echoed, a strange heaviness settling in his stomach. Baker lost a prize calf. Worth a few thousand, apparently. Can't blame him for being upset. Michael set a mug of coffee in front of Sam. Wolves are just doing what comes naturally. It's not malicious. Sam shrugged, sipping his coffee. Try telling that to a rancher who's out a few $1,000s. A soft thump from the back room made Sam turn his head. What was that? Old cabin, Michael said quickly. Settles when it warms up. Sam seemed to accept this explanation, but his next words froze Michael's blood. Saw some weird tracks coming up to your place. Almost looked like wolf prints, but that'd be strange, wouldn't it? Wolf coming right up to a human dwelling. Michael forced a laugh. Probably just a large coyote. They get bold when they're hungry. Maybe. Sam didn't look convinced. He finished his coffee and stood. Thanks for the coffee. Better get back on the road before it starts getting dark. As Sam headed for the door, he paused, bending down to pick something up from the floor near the fireplace. Michael's heart sank as Sam lifted a tuft of silver fur between his fingers. Funny-looking coyote, Sam remarked, his expression suddenly guarded. Michael felt every muscle in his body tense. Sam, we've known each other a while now, Michael, Sam interrupted, rolling the tuft of fur between his fingers. You've always been straight with me, so I'm going to be straight with you. If you've got one of those wolves here, you're putting yourself in danger. Not just from the animal, but from folks like Baker who'd shoot first and ask questions later. I found it injured in the storm, Michael admitted, seeing no point in further denial. Just patched it up. It'll be gone as soon as it can move properly. Sam sighed, dropping the fur into the fireplace where it curled and blackened. I didn't see anything, he said quietly. But Michael, you need to be careful. These aren't pets. And if it's the one that's been killing livestock. I know what I'm doing, Sam. Former vet, remember? Former being the operative word. Sam gestured toward Michael's missing arm. Your reflexes aren't what they used to be. The words stung more than Michael wanted to admit. I can handle myself, if you say so. Sam headed for the door. Just don't let attachment cloud your judgment. That animal belongs in the wild. Not in your living room. After Sam left, Michael stood motionless, staring at the closed door. The silence stretched until a soft padding of paws announced Ghost's return from wherever it had hidden. The wolf moved to Michael's side, pressing lightly against his leg. You're causing me a lot of trouble, Michael told it, but there was no anger in his voice. Ghost looked up at him, and again Michael was struck by the uncanny sense that the animal understood not just his words, but the emotions behind them. It was that gaze, deep, knowing, almost human, that had made him bring the wolf inside in the first place. Darkness fell early, as it always did in winter. Michael added logs to the fire and prepared a simple dinner, setting aside a portion of meat for Ghost. The wolf ate carefully, then returned to its spot by the fire, eyes heavy with what looked like contentment. Michael settled into his armchair with a book, but found himself watching the wolf more than reading. There was something mesmerizing about the rise and fall of its breath, the occasional twitch of an ear, the intelligent eyes that would sometimes open to meet his gaze before closing again. What am I going to do with you? He murmured, more to himself than to Ghost. Sam was right. The wolf couldn't stay. Not just because of the danger it might pose, but because wild animals belonged in the wild. Yet the thought of sending Ghost back out into the forest, where hunters might be looking specifically for a silver wolf, sat uneasily in Michael's chest. That night, Michael dreamed again. He was running through snow, but this time there was fear driving him forward. Behind him came the sounds of pursuit, men's voices, dogs barking, the crack of rifles. He felt a burning pain in his flank, smelled his own blood on the air. Ahead loomed a structure, a cabin with warm light spilling from its windows. Safety, if only he could reach it. Michael woke with a gasp, heart racing. Ghost was standing by his bed, ears perked and eyes gleaming in the darkness. Outside, the distant howl of a wolf shattered the night silence. Ghost's head whipped toward the sound, body tensing. Another howl rose, closer this time. Ghost paced to the window, ears forward, every muscle tense. The bandage on its flank stood out starkly against the silver fur. Michael joined the wolf at the window, scanning the moonlit landscape. At the edge of the tree line, shadows moved, darker patches against the night. As his eyes adjusted, Michael could make out the forms of wolves, at least 3 of them, standing just beyond the clearing that surrounded his cabin. "Your family?" Michael asked softly. Ghost made a sound low in its throat, not quite a growl, but not a whine either. Something in between, filled with conflict. One of the shadows detached itself from the others, venturing a few steps into the clearing. Moonlight revealed a large black wolf, its stance confident and commanding. It raised its head and howled again, a sound that seemed to carry meaning beyond mere animal communication. Ghost pressed a paw against the window, leaving a smudge on the glass. The longing in the gesture was unmistakable. "You want to go to them," Michael said, surprised by the pang of loss he felt at the thought. Ghost turned to look at him, and in its eyes, Michael saw the same impossible understanding, the same intelligence that had haunted him since that first moment on the porch. Then, without warning, the wolf licked his hand once, a gesture so domestic, so unwolf-like that Michael could only stare in shock. Before he could react further, Ghost was at the door, pawing at it insistently. Michael hesitated only a moment before opening it. "Be careful out there," he said, feeling foolish for the concern in his voice. Ghost paused on the threshold, looking back one last time. Then it was gone, a silver streak racing across the snow toward its waiting pack. Michael watched until all the wolves disappeared into the forest, the night swallowing them whole. Only then did he close the door, the cabin suddenly emptier than it had felt in years. For 3 days, Michael tried to convince himself that letting Ghost go had been the right decision. The wolf belonged with its pack, running free in the wilderness, not confined in a cabin with a one-armed recluse. He repeated this like a mantra, especially during the quiet evenings when he found himself glancing repeatedly at the empty space by the fireplace. "This is ridiculous," he muttered on the 4th morning, catching himself checking the tree line yet again. It was a wild animal, not a pet, not a friend. Yet the wolf had left an impression deeper than he'd expected. The cabin felt hollow without Ghost presence, the silver fur, the intelligent eyes, the quiet companionship. Michael had grown so accustomed to solitude that he hadn't realized how much he'd needed that connection until it was gone. Snow began falling again around noon, fat flakes swirling lazily from a leaden sky. Michael was chopping more firewood with his right arm, a skill he perfected through necessity, when he heard a vehicle approaching. He set down the axe, squinting through the gently falling snow to see Sheriff Dawson's patrol SUV crawling up the long driveway. The sheriff was a barrel-chested man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a perpetually stern expression. He wasn't unkind, but he didn't waste time on pleasantries either. Michael braced himself as the sheriff approached, stomping snow from his boots. "Afternoon, Reeves. Holding up okay after the storm?" "Fine, thanks. What brings you all the way out here, Sheriff?" Dawson's gaze swept over the property before settling back on Michael. "Had some more livestock killings last night. Monroe lost 2 more sheep, and the Jenkins place reported a goat missing." "That's unfortunate," Michael said carefully. "What's interesting," Dawson continued, "is that we found tracks. Not just ordinary wolf tracks either. Game warden says they belong to a pack led by an unusually large wolf. Michael maintained a neutral expression. I'm not sure how this concerns me. Sam Turner mentioned he saw strange tracks coming up to your cabin a few days back. Thought they might be wolf tracks. Michael silently cursed Sam. So much for not seeing anything. Probably just coyotes. They get bold when they're hungry. Sheriff Dawson hummed noncommittally. Mind if I come in for a minute? Getting pretty cold out here. Michael hesitated but couldn't think of a valid reason to refuse. He led the sheriff inside, relieved that any evidence of ghost presence had been removed days ago. Dawson looked around the Spartan cabin before settling into a chair by the fire. I'll get straight to the point, Reeves. We've got ranchers losing valuable livestock, and they're getting worked up. Baker's organizing a hunting party to track down this wolf pack. Is that legal? Michael asked, unable to hide his concern. With the proper permits, yes. But I'm concerned things might get out of hand. Baker's not known for his restraint. Michael frowned. Why are you telling me this? Dawson fixed him with a penetrating stare. Because I have a feeling you might have a personal interest in this situation. Michael felt his pulse quicken but kept his face neutral. I don't follow. Sam didn't just see tracks, Reeves. He saw silver fur in your cabin. Now, I know you've got a background in veterinary medicine. I respect that. But harboring a predator that's killing local livestock? That's not just unwise. It could be construed as interfering with these ranchers' livelihoods. Michael clenched his jaw. I found an injured wolf during the blizzard. It was suffering, so I treated its wounds. It left days ago, returned to its pack. I don't think that constitutes harboring. And this wolf, what did it look like? Silver gray, distinctive white marking around one ear. Dawson nodded slowly. That matches the description of the alpha leading this pack. The one Baker's specifically gunning for. Michael felt a cold knot form in his stomach. I didn't know it was causing problems. Well, now you do. Dawson stood up. Baker's hunting party heads out tomorrow at dawn. Just thought you should know. As the sheriff's SUV disappeared down the driveway. Michael stood on the porch, his mind racing. Ghost wasn't just any wolf. It was the alpha of the pack, specifically targeted by angry ranchers armed with rifles and a thirst for retribution. Michael paced the length of his cabin, considering his options. He could do nothing, tell himself it wasn't his problem. Ghost had chosen to return to the wild. Whatever happened now is simply nature taking its course, predator and prey, humans protecting their interests. But those eyes haunted him. That intelligence, that connection he'd felt. It hadn't been his imagination. There was something special about Ghost, something that went beyond normal animal instinct. Damn it, Michael said, grabbing his coat. He couldn't stand by and let Ghost be hunted down. The snow was falling more heavily now, but Michael was familiar with the forest around his property. He set out toward the area where he'd last seen Ghost and the other wolves, following the tree lane. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air as he scanned the ground for tracks, any sign of the pack's presence. After an hour of searching, with daylight fading and the snow coming down harder, Michael had found nothing. He was about to turn back when a flicker of movement caught his eye. Something dark against the white, a shadow gliding between the trees about 50 yards ahead. Ghost, he called, his voice quickly swallowed by the snow-muffled forest. The figure stopped, and Michael's breath caught as he recognized the black wolf he'd seen from his window, the one that had called to Ghost that night. It stood perfectly still, watching him with wary eyes. I'm not here to hurt you, Michael said, knowing how ridiculous it must sound. I'm looking for Ghost, the silver one, with the white circle on its ear. The black wolf regarded him for a long moment, then turned and trotted deeper into the forest. After a few steps, it paused, looking back as if waiting. You want me to follow? Michael asked incredulously. The wolf continued on, stopping occasionally to ensure Michael was still behind it. Every instinct told Michael this was dangerous, possibly insane, but he pressed forward, driven by a need he couldn't fully explain. The black wolf led him deeper into the forest, to an area Michael had never explored despite his years living in the mountains. They skirted the edge of a frozen stream, climbed a gentle slope, and finally arrived at the mouth of a small cave partially hidden by fallen trees. The black wolf stopped, letting out a short, huffing bark. From inside the cave came an answering sound, a familiar whine that made Michael's heart leap. Ghost emerged from the shadowy interior, silver fur immediately distinctive against the darkening forest. The wolf froze upon seeing Michael, ears perked forward in apparent surprise. "Hey there," Michael said softly, remaining still to avoid alarming either animal. Ghost approached slowly, cautiously, as if uncertain of its welcome. When it reached Michael, it pressed its muzzle briefly against his hand, a gesture so deliberate, so gentle, that it took Michael's breath away. "They're going to hunt you," Michael said, crouching to the wolf's level. "Baker and the others. They're blaming you for the livestock killings." Ghost's ears flattened, and it turned toward the cave entrance. Michael followed its gaze and felt his blood run cold. Inside, barely visible in the shadows, lay more wolves, not just adults, but pups, their small forms huddled together for warmth. "You have a family," Michael whispered. The reality of the situation hit him with startling clarity. Ghost wasn't just the alpha, it was a parent protecting its young. The livestock killings weren't random aggression, they were necessary for survival. Feeding a pack with pups during the harsh winter months would drive any wolf to take risks it might otherwise avoid. The black wolf moved to Ghost's side, and Michael noticed how they flanked each other, partners, mates. A family unit leading the rest of the pack. "If Baker finds this place," Michael said, more to himself than to the wolves, "he won't just kill the adults." He had seen enough hunting parties in his youth to know how they operated. They would eliminate any threat, including pups that would grow into the predators they feared. It would be a slaughter, not a hunt. Night was falling fast, the temperature dropping with it. Michael stood, his decision made. "You need to move," he told Ghost, gesturing toward the den. "All of you. Baker's hunting party leaves at dawn. They'll find this place. It's too close to the valley, too close to the farms." Ghost regarded him steadily, that same unnerving intelligence in its amber eyes. The black wolf beside it growled softly, clearly less trusting of the human in their territory. "I know a place," Michael continued, wondering if he had completely lost his mind, talking to wolves as if they could understand complex human speech. "North of here, in the higher mountains, there's a system of caves. Far from any farms or ranches, game is plentiful, deer, elk. You'd be safer there." Michael paused, realizing the absurdity of the situation. Even if Ghost understood him somehow, how could he expect a pack of wild wolves to follow his directions? To relocate their den based on his warning? Yet as he turned to leave, Ghost nudged his leg, then took a few steps in the direction of his cabin before looking back expectantly. "You want me to show you?" Michael asked incredulously. Ghost continued looking at him, waiting. "Okay," Michael said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I'll lead the way. But we need to move tonight, before the hunting party sets out." As if in response, Ghost turned to the den and let out a series of soft barks and whines. The black wolf seemed to hesitate, then slipped inside the cave. Moments later, adult wolves began to emerge, 5 in total, including Ghost and the black one. Last came the pups, 3 small bundles of fur, unsteady on their feet and clearly frightened by the commotion. Michael stared in amazement as Ghost organized the pack, nudging the pups toward the stronger adults, positioning itself at the front beside its mate. When all were assembled, Ghost looked to Michael expectantly. The sun had set completely now, but the fresh snow reflected what little light remained, casting the forest in a pale blue glow. Michael took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air and headed north, setting a pace the pack could follow. Behind him came the soft padding of paws on snow, Ghost at his heels, the others following in a single file line. The journey through the night forest was surreal. Michael led the wolf pack along winding game trails, up rocky slopes, and across open meadows blanketed in pristine snow. The wolves moved with a natural grace that made his own progress seem clumsy in comparison, but they never rushed ahead, always keeping pace with his human limitations. Twice they stopped to rest, mainly for Michael's benefit. During these breaks, the adult wolves formed a protective circle around the pups, while Ghost would come to sit by Michael's side, as if checking on his well-being. The caves Michael had in mind were in a remote part of the national forest, an area he'd explored years ago during his first summer in the mountains. They were spacious, sheltered from the elements, and most importantly, far from human habitation. Dawn was breaking by the time they reached the area, the eastern sky lightening to a pale lavender. Michael led the pack to the largest cave entrance, partially hidden behind a stand of pines. "This should do," he said, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Water nearby, good hunting grounds, and no one comes here, especially in winter." Ghost approached the cave cautiously, sniffing the entrance to ensure no other predators had claimed it. Apparently satisfied, it signaled to the others, who began moving inside, the pups ushered in first for safety. Michael stood by, watching the wolves settle into their new den. He felt a strange mixture of emotions: pride, concern, and a profound sense of connection to these wild creatures that defied rational explanation. Ghost remained outside, watching as the last of the pack disappeared into the cave. Then it turned to Michael, eyes reflecting the first rays of sunlight filtering through the trees. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Michael felt that same inexplicable understanding pass between them, a silent communication that transcended the boundaries of species. "You should be safe here," Michael said finally. "Baker and his hunting party won't come this far north." Ghost moved closer, pressing its head briefly against Michael's leg, a gesture of what could only be interpreted as gratitude. Then it looked back toward its pack, torn between two worlds. "Go on," Michael urged softly. "Take care of your family." With a final look that Michael would remember for the rest of his life, Ghost padded into the cave to join the others. Michael stood there long after the silver wolf had disappeared, the reality of what had just happened settling over him like the gently falling snow. He had led a pack of wolves through the night forest. They had followed him, trusted him. And Ghost had understood him, had communicated in ways that went beyond normal animal behavior. The experience had awakened something within him, a connection to the natural world he had forgotten during his years of isolation. As Michael finally turned to begin the long journey back to his cabin, he knew his life would never be the same. The boundary between his world and the wild had been forever altered by a silver wolf with a circle of white around its ear. Michael trudged back to his cabin as the dawn fully broke, exhaustion weighing his limbs but his mind strangely alert. He had just led a pack of wolves to safety, an act that defied logic, yet felt more right than anything he'd done in years. The memory of Ghost's intelligent eyes burned bright in his thoughts. There had been gratitude there, and something deeper, a connection that transcended the usual boundaries between human and wild. He reached his cabin by mid-morning, muscles aching from the night's journey. After stoking the fire and brewing strong coffee, Michael collapsed into his armchair, intending to rest for just a moment before cleaning up. Instead, he fell into a deep sleep, dreaming once again of running through forests on four legs, but this time without fear. In the dream, he led a pack through moonlit woods, feeling their trust, their reliance, their family bonds. The sound of approaching vehicles jolted him awake. Michael blinked groggily at the window, shocked to see the afternoon sun already low in the sky. Two trucks were coming up his driveway, Sheriff Dawson's SUV followed by a mud-splattered pickup he recognized as belonging to Baker, the rancher. "Damn it," Michael muttered, quickly pulling on his boots. His clothes were still damp from the snow, his face unshaven, and he knew he looked like he'd been out all night, which he had. Not the best circumstance for facing an angry rancher. Michael opened the door before they could knock. Sheriff Dawson stood at the front, his expression carefully neutral. Behind him loomed Frank Baker, a burly man with a permanent scowl etched into his weathered face. 3 other men waited in Baker's truck, rifles visible in the rack behind them. "Afternoon, Reeves," Dawson said. "Mind if we have a word?" "Sheriff." "Baker." Michael nodded to each, stepping aside to let them enter. "What can I do for you?" Baker didn't wait for an invitation to speak. "Our hunting party tracked those wolves to a den about 5 miles from here. Found the place abandoned. They cleared out some time last night." His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Mighty convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" Michael kept his expression neutral. "I wouldn't know anything about wolf behavior." "Funny thing about those tracks," Baker continued, ignoring Michael's response. "They led away from the den in a neat, single-file line, almost like they were following something." He paused meaningfully. "Or someone." Sheriff Dawson cleared his throat. "Mr. Baker found some unusual prints mixed in with the wolf tracks." "Human prints? You mean boot prints? In a national forest?" "Hardly surprising." Michael struggled to keep his voice even. "These prints were leading the pack," Baker snapped. "And they look about your size, Reeves." Michael felt cold sweat forming on his back. "Are you accusing me of something, Baker?" "Frank believes someone interfered with their hunt," Dawson interjected, "by warning the wolves off." "That's insane," Michael said, though his heart hammered in his chest. "How would anyone warn a pack of wolves? They're wild animals, not pets." Baker's face reddened. "Don't play dumb with me. Sam Turner told us about that wolf you were harboring, the same one that's been killing my livestock. The alpha with the silver coat. I helped an injured animal," Michael replied evenly. "As I already explained to the sheriff. It left days ago, and now magically the whole pack disappears right before our hunt." Baker took a step forward, invading Michael's space. "Those wolves cost me thousands in lost cattle. They're vermin, and you're interfering with my right to protect my property." Sheriff Dawson placed a restraining hand on Baker's shoulder. "Take it easy, Frank. We don't have any proof Michael did anything wrong. Look at him." Baker gestured wildly. "He's been out all night. Muddy boots, exhausted, clothes still damp. He led those wolves away. I'm sure of it." Michael met Baker's accusing glare without flinching. "I don't answer to you about my comings and goings, Baker. This is my property, and you're trespassing on my patience." Sheriff Dawson stepped between them. "That's enough. Frank, I told you we're just asking questions here. No accusations." Baker jabbed a finger toward Michael. "Those wolves are destroying my livelihood, and this one-armed city boy is protecting them. I want him charged with interference." "With what evidence?" Dawson asked, his patience clearly thinning. "Muddy boots aren't a crime, Frank." Baker fumed silently, glaring at Michael with undisguised hostility. "If there's nothing else," Michael said, "I'd appreciate it if you'd leave. It's been a long day." Sheriff Dawson nodded, guiding Baker toward the door. "We'll be going." "But Michael," he added, turning back, "if you do know anything about where that pack went, it would be best to share it. These attacks are becoming a serious problem for the community." "I understand," Michael said, "but I can't help you." After they left, Michael watched through the window as Baker argued heatedly with the sheriff in the driveway. Eventually, both vehicles pulled away, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the fading adrenaline. Michael paced his cabin, mind racing. Baker wouldn't let this go easily. The man had lost livestock, money, and now his chance at retribution. People like that didn't simply accept defeat. They looked for someone to blame. His satellite phone rang, startling him. It was Sam Turner. "I heard Baker and the sheriff paid you a visit," Sam said without preamble. "News travels fast," Michael replied dryly. "Small community. Listen, Baker's on the warpath. He's convinced you're the reason his hunting party failed, and he's not being quiet about it." Michael sighed. "Great. There's more," Sam continued. "The attacks on livestock have stopped completely since yesterday. Not a single incident reported anywhere in the valley." Michael felt a surge of relief. Ghost had listened, The pack was staying away from the farms, hunting in the more remote territory where he'd led them. "That's good, isn't it?" Michael asked. "You'd think so," Sam said. "But Baker's taking it as further proof that someone intervened. Says the wolves were taught to avoid his property. That's ridiculous. They're wild animals responding to hunting pressure. You and I know that. But Baker's got support. Some of the other ranchers are worried about what happens when the wolves get hungry again. They're pushing for a larger, organized hunt, professionals from the State Wildlife Service." Michael felt his stomach drop. They can't just exterminate an entire pack. With the right permits and enough complaints about livestock predation, they can. "Look, I don't know what you did or didn't do with that wolf, but I thought you should know what's brewing." After hanging up, Michael stepped onto his porch, staring at the distant mountains where Ghost and the pack were now hidden. The caves were remote, but professional trackers could find them eventually. The wolves needed to move further, perhaps even across the state line into the vast wilderness areas where hunting was prohibited. But how could he warn them? The night journey had been miraculous, unlikely to be replicated. Ghost had sought him out before, but there was no guarantee it would happen again. That night, Michael dreamed of running once more. This time, he was racing alongside Ghost, trying to outpace shadowy figures with rifles. He could feel the wolf's fear, its determination to protect the pack. When he woke, sweating and disoriented, he couldn't shake the feeling that the dream had been more than just his subconscious processing the day's events. For the next 3 days, Michael kept expecting Baker or the sheriff to return, but his cabin remained undisturbed. The isolation, once comforting, now felt oppressive. He found himself checking the tree line constantly, hoping for a glimpse of silver fur. On the 4th day, as Michael chopped wood in the clearing behind his cabin, he felt a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, the feeling of being watched. He set down the axe and slowly turned toward the forest edge. There, half hidden among the pines, stood Ghost. The wolf's silver coat was unmistakable against the dark trunks, the white circle around its notched ear catching the afternoon light. "Ghost," Michael breathed. "What are you doing here?" The wolf padded forward, its movements cautious but purposeful. When it reached Michael, it circled him once, sniffing his clothes, then sat back on its haunches, looking up at him with those intelligent amber eyes. Michael crouched down, bringing himself to the wolf's level. "You need to be careful. Baker and the others are still looking for you." Ghost whined softly, ears twitching. It seemed agitated, restless, so different from its confident demeanor during their night journey. "What's wrong?" Michael asked. "Is the pack okay?" As if in response, Ghost stood and took a few steps toward the forest, then looked back expectantly, the same behavior it had shown at the old den. It wanted Michael to follow. "No? It's still daylight. Someone could see us." The wolf whined again, more insistently this time. Whatever had brought Ghost back to his cabin, it couldn't wait for darkness. "All right," Michael said, decision made. "Let me grab my coat." Inside, he quickly gathered essentials, water, a first aid kit, his hunting knife, stuffing them into a small backpack. On impulse, he added the satellite phone. Whatever Ghost wanted to show him, it felt important enough to be prepared. When he emerged from the cabin, the wolf was waiting impatiently, pacing in small circles. As soon as it saw Michael, it set off toward the trees at a brisk trot. "I'm coming," Michael called, following as quickly as he could. They moved through the forest, Ghost setting a pace that challenged Michael but never pulling too far ahead. The wolf seemed to know exactly where it was going, weaving through dense underbrush and around rocky outcroppings with confidence. After about an hour of steady hiking, Michael realized they weren't heading toward the caves where he'd led the pack. Instead, Ghost was taking him east, toward a less familiar part of the mountains. The terrain became increasingly rough, the slopes steeper. Michael's breath came in short gasps, his legs burning with exertion. "Need a minute," he panted, stopping to lean against a tree. Ghost circled back, watching him with what looked like impatience. "Sorry, I can't keep up with 4 legs." The wolf huffed, almost sounding like a sigh, but waited until Michael had caught his breath before moving on. As they crested a ridge, Michael stopped in his tracks. Below them lay a narrow valley he'd never seen before, bisected by a small stream. On the opposite slope, partially hidden by trees, were the unmistakable straight lines of human construction, a cabin, similar to his own but clearly abandoned. The roof had partially collapsed, and vegetation grew wild around it. "What is this place?" Michael wondered aloud. Ghost didn't pause, heading down the slope toward the dilapidated structure. Michael followed more carefully, his senses on high alert. As they approached the cabin, he could see it had been abandoned for years, windows broken, door hanging off its hinges, wildlife having reclaimed much of the space. The wolf stopped at the entrance, looking back at Michael with an expectant gaze. "You want me to go in there?" Michael asked skeptically. "It looks like it could collapse any minute." Ghost whined, pawing at the threshold. Michael approached cautiously, testing each step on the rotting porch. "If I fall through the floor, I'm blaming you," he told the wolf. Inside, the cabin was a mess of fallen beams, animal droppings, and moldering furniture. Sunlight filtered through holes in the roof, creating dusty shafts of light that illuminated the decay. It had been a simple one-room structure with a small kitchen area, a bed, and a desk. Nothing remarkable. "What am I looking for?" Michael asked, turning to Ghost. The wolf padded over to the desk area, nosing at something underneath. Michael carefully made his way over, kneeling to see what had caught the animal's attention. It was a metal box, the kind used for storing documents, partially concealed by debris. Michael pulled it free, wiping away years of dust and grime. The lock had rusted through, allowing him to pry the lid open with minimal effort. Inside were notebooks, old, leather-bound journals with yellowed pages. The handwriting was tight and meticulous, the entries dated. The oldest was from nearly 30 years ago. Michael opened to a random page and began to read. March 15th, 1995, the wolf returned today. The same one with the distinctive white marking around its ear. This is the 3rd visit this month. Its behavior continues to defy conventional understanding of wolf ecology. It seems to recognize me, to communicate in ways that go beyond normal animal intelligence. I've begun documenting these interactions systematically, though I hesitate to share my findings with the scientific community. They would dismiss it as anthropomorphism, or worse, the delusions of a man who has spent too long in isolation. Michael's hand trembled as he flipped to another entry. April 28th, 1995, an extraordinary development. I dreamed I was running with the pack last night, seeing the forest through wolf eyes. Upon waking, I discovered fresh paw prints leading to my door. The white-marked wolf was waiting outside, as if aware of my dream. I can no longer deny there is some form of connection developing between us that science cannot explain. Michael looked up from the journal, his heart pounding. A wolf with a white marking around its ear? But that's... He stared at Ghost, who sat watching him intently. That's impossible. This was 30 years ago. He turned to another entry, dated several years later. September 3rd, 1998. I believe I've identified the nature of our connection. The locals speak of legends, stories passed down from the indigenous people who once lived in these mountains. They tell of spirit animals, wolves in particular, who form bonds with certain humans. These bonds transcend normal animal-human relationships. They're partnerships, bridges between worlds. The elders say such wolves can live far longer than normal, that they possess wisdom and intelligence beyond their species. I was skeptical of such folklore, but my experiences these past years have left me no choice but to reconsider. Michael sat back on his heels, mind reeling. "Ghost," he whispered, "what are you?" The wolf met his gaze steadily, those amber eyes seeming to hold secrets as ancient as the mountains themselves. Michael continued reading, jumping ahead to one of the final entries. July 17th, 2001. I can no longer remain here. The development plans for the valley have been approved. Logging will begin next month, followed by construction. I fought it as long as possible, but money speaks louder than conservation in these parts. The wolves will be driven further into the mountains, possibly killed if they resist displacement. My research, my connection with them, all will be lost. I've documented everything in these journals, hoping that someday someone will understand what I've discovered, that the boundary between human and wolf, between civilization and wilderness, is far more permeable than we believe. That there exist creatures like my white-marked friend who bridge these worlds, who choose certain humans to connect with. I leave tomorrow for the Yukon. Perhaps there, the wild can remain wild. The journal ended there, the remaining pages blank. Michael carefully placed it back in the box with the others. His mind was a whirlwind of questions, theories, and implications. If these journals were accurate, Ghost was not just any wolf. It was something special, possibly the same wolf that had formed a connection with the cabin's former occupant 3 decades ago. "You brought me here to show me this," Michael said, looking at Ghost. "You wanted me to understand." The wolf moved closer, pressing its muzzle against Michael's hand. The gesture was gentle, deliberate, an acknowledgement. "This changes everything," Michael whispered. He gathered the journals into the box and tucked it under his arm. The sun was dipping toward the horizon. They needed to start back soon if they hoped to reach his cabin before full dark. As they emerged from the abandoned cabin, Michael paused to look back at the structure. What happened to him? The man who wrote these? Ghost offered no answer, simply waiting for Michael to lead the way back up the ridge. The return journey was mostly silent. Michael lost in thought as he processed what he'd discovered. The journals presented a reality he would have dismissed as fantasy just days ago. Yet his own experiences with Ghost, the dreams, the inexplicable understanding, the intelligence in those amber eyes, all supported the incredible possibility that this wolf was something beyond ordinary. When they finally reached the edge of the forest near Michael's cabin, Ghost stopped. Darkness had fallen, but the lights from the cabin windows cast a warm glow across the snow-covered clearing. "You're not coming any closer?" Michael asked. Ghost looked toward the cabin, then back at the forest, ears alert. "I understand," Michael said. "It's not safe for you here." He hesitated, then added, "But Baker and the others aren't giving up. They're bringing in professional trackers. You need to take the pack further away, across the state line into the protected wilderness area." The wolf's gaze remained fixed on him, that familiar intelligent focus that made Michael feel truly seen. "I'll try to buy you time," Michael promised. "And I'll study these journals, try to understand, whatever this is between us." Ghost stepped forward, pressing its head against Michael's leg one final time. Then, without warning, it turned and disappeared into the darkness, a silver ghost melting into the night. Michael stood watching the empty forest for a long moment before heading back to his cabin, the box of journals tucked securely under his arm. Something had fundamentally shifted in his world, and there was no going back to the life he'd known before. Michael spent the next 3 days immersed in the journals, barely sleeping, often forgetting to eat. The metal box had contained 7 notebooks in total, spanning nearly a decade of observations, theories, and personal reflections. The author, who signed his entries as Dr. Thomas Blackwood, had documented his experiences with the white-marked wolf in painstaking detail. Blackwood had been a wildlife biologist who came to the mountains to study wolf behavior. What began as standard research had transformed into something extraordinary when he encountered the unusual silver wolf. The early entries were cautious, scientific, hypothesizing about genetic anomalies or rare behavioral adaptations. But as the years progressed, Blackwood's tone changed. His entries became more personal, more certain that he was witnessing something science couldn't fully explain. Most compelling were the passages describing dreams similar to Michael's own, running with the pack, seeing through wolf eyes, experiencing the forest from a predator's perspective. Blackwood had initially dismissed these as stress-induced hallucinations or an overactive imagination. Eventually, he came to believe they were genuine mental connections facilitated by the wolf. One entry in particular captured Michael's attention. October 12, 1996, after months of research into local folklore, I've discovered references to what the indigenous Ute people called spirit wolves or bridge walkers. These were not considered ordinary animals, but rather beings that existed between worlds, the physical and the spiritual. They were said to choose certain humans as companions, forming connections that transcended normal boundaries. Such wolves were described as having distinctive markings, often a perfect circle of white fur. They were believed to live far beyond normal wolf lifespans, possessing the accumulated wisdom of generations. Modern science would dismiss this as mere superstition, but my experiences suggest otherwise. The wolf's behavior, its apparent understanding of human communication, its tendency to appear precisely when needed, all point to something beyond conventional zoological explanation. I've begun to wonder if our rigid categorization of animal and human intelligence might be blinding us to possibilities that indigenous cultures have recognized for centuries. Michael rubbed his tired eyes, trying to reconcile Blackwood's theories with his own experiences. If Ghost truly was the same wolf, or somehow connected to the one Blackwood had encountered, it would mean the animal was far older than any wolf should be. 30 years was well beyond the typical 6 to 8 year lifespan of wolves in the wild, or even the 15 years they might reach in captivity. Yet the physical description was unmistakable: the silver coat, the distinctive white circle around a notched ear. And the behavior, the intelligence, the dreams, the connection, all matched his own interactions with Ghost. As Michael closed the final journal, his satellite phone rang. It was Sam Turner. "Michael, you need to be careful," Sam said without preamble, his voice tense. "Baker's gone off the deep end. He's convinced you're sabotaging his efforts to hunt the wolves." "What's he saying?" Michael asked, though he could already guess. "He's been drinking at the Bull's Horn all afternoon, telling anyone who'll listen that you've got some kind of unnatural connection with the pack. Says you led them away from his hunting party, that you're protecting them." Michael's grip tightened on the phone. "That's absurd." "Maybe so, but he's getting support. His ranch employs half the town, and folks depend on the business his cattle bring. Some are taking his side. And what does Sheriff Dawson have to say about this?" "He's trying to keep things calm, but Baker's filing formal complaints, trespassing, interfering with legal hunting activities, even economic sabotage. None of it will stick, but it's stirring things up." "Great," Michael muttered. "Just what I need." "There's more," Sam continued. "Baker's brought in private trackers, ex-military types with all sorts of high-tech equipment. They're setting up motion sensors, infrared cameras, the works. If those wolves are anywhere in the county, these guys will find them." Michael felt a chill run through him. Ghost had led the pack north, but professional trackers might still pick up their trail. And with the pups slowing them down, they couldn't move quickly enough to outpace determined hunters. "When are they starting?" Michael asked, already thinking ahead. "Tomorrow morning." "Look, Michael, I don't know what's going on between you and these wolves, and frankly, I don't want to know. But watch your back. Baker's got a mean streak when he feels threatened." After hanging up, Michael paced the cabin, weighing his options. He could try to find Ghost again, warn the pack, but there was no guarantee the wolf would come to him. And wandering the mountains looking for them would only fuel Baker's accusations. He returned to Blackwood's journals, searching for any insight that might help. In one of the later entries, the biologist had mentioned using specific calls to communicate with the white-marked wolf. Sounds modeled after wolf vocalizations, but distinct enough to be recognized. "Worth a try," Michael muttered. That evening, as twilight settled over the mountains, Michael ventured to the edge of the forest behind his cabin. He felt self-conscious, even ridiculous, as he attempted to recreate the howl Blackwood had described, a long note followed by two shorter ones. His first attempt was awkward, breaking in the middle. He cleared his throat and tried again, the sound carrying farther across the silent landscape. On his third try, the howl felt more natural, echoing through the trees and across the valley below. Then he waited, feeling increasingly foolish as minutes passed with no response. Just as he was about to give up, a faint howl answered from the distant forest, the unmistakable voice of a wolf, responding with the same pattern. It worked, Michael whispered, stunned. But his elation quickly faded as headlights appeared on the road leading to his cabin. He recognized Baker's pickup truck, followed by another vehicle he didn't know. Michael hurried back inside, cursing under his breath. Had they heard his howling? Were they already watching his cabin? He barely had time to hide Blackwood's journals before pounding sounded on his door. "Open up, Reeves." Baker's voice slurred with alcohol. Michael took a deep breath, steeling himself before opening the door. Baker stood on the porch, swaying slightly, his ruddy face twisted with anger. Behind him was a lean, hard-looking man Michael didn't recognize, wearing camouflage gear with a knife strapped to his belt. "What do you want, Baker?" Michael asked, positioning himself to block the doorway. "We heard you," Baker spat, "calling to your wolf friends. Just like the crazy mountain man everyone says you are. I don't know what you're talking about." The man in camouflage stepped forward. That was a poor imitation of a wolf howl, but it was definitely human-made. "I'm Curtis Maddox, Mr. Baker's head of security." His voice was cold, professional. "We're setting up a perimeter around this area to track predator movements. That includes monitoring unusual activities, like humans howling to wolves." Michael measured his response carefully. "This is private property. You have no right to monitor anything here. We have permits for the surrounding national forest," Maddox replied smoothly. "And reasonable suspicion that someone is interfering with legal hunting activities." Baker jabbed a finger at Michael's chest. "I know what you did. Those wolves were right within our grasp until you warned them off. God knows how, but you did it." "You're drunk, Baker," Michael said evenly. "Go home before you do something stupid. Those wolves killed 6 of my prized cattle. That's over $15,000 in losses. Someone's going to pay. Then file an insurance claim," Michael snapped. "Don't blame me for your problems." Baker's face darkened. "You think you're untouchable up here in your little cabin? We'll see about that." He gestured broadly to the forest around them. "My men are setting up motion sensors, cameras, acoustic monitoring equipment. Nothing moves out there without us knowing. And if we catch you interfering again, that's enough." Frank, Maddox cut in, placing a restraining hand on Baker's shoulder. "Mr. Reeves understands the situation." His cold eyes fixed on Michael. "We'll be watching." After they left, Michael stood on the porch, listening to the retreating sound of their vehicles. His mind raced. If Baker's team was setting up surveillance around the area, Ghost and the pack were in immediate danger. Even more concerning was the possibility that they might catch Michael communicating with the wolves, evidence that would lend credibility to Baker's accusations. He spent a restless night, tossing in bed, his dreams fragmented and disturbing. Images of wolves running, the sound of gunshots, Ghost lying still in bloodstained snow. He woke with a start, heart racing, the faint light of dawn seeping through his curtains. A soft scratching at his back door drew him instantly alert. Moving quietly, Michael pulled on his clothes and made his way through the darkened cabin. When he carefully opened the door, Ghost was waiting, its silver coat almost glowing in the pre-dawn light. "You came," Michael whispered, quickly scanning the tree line for any sign of Baker's surveillance. "But it's not safe. They're watching the property." Ghost seemed to understand, maintaining a position close to the cabin where it would be harder to spot from a distance. The wolf's demeanor was tense, ears constantly moving, nostrils flaring as it sampled the air. "I tried to warn you," Michael said softly. "Baker's brought in professional trackers. They're setting up equipment all through the forest. You need to get the pack across the state line, into the protected wilderness area." Ghost whined softly, pressing against Michael's leg. There was an urgency in the contact, a desperation he hadn't felt before. What is it? Is the pack in trouble? The wolf moved a few steps away, then looked back expectantly, the same behavior it had shown before, when it wanted Michael to follow. But this time, following wasn't an option. Not with Baker's men watching the property, possibly even now observing through high-powered optics. I can't, Michael said, hating the words even as he spoke them. They're monitoring everything. If I leave with you, I'll lead them straight to the pack. Ghost paced anxiously, clearly torn between staying and returning to its family. Wait, Michael said suddenly. I need to show you something. He ducked back inside, retrieving Blackwood's journals from their hiding place. When he returned, Ghost was still there, watching the tree lean nervously. Michael knelt beside the wolf, opening one of the journals to a page with a hand-drawn map. Blackwood, the man who knew you before, he mapped the old Forest Service roads. There's one here, he pointed, that crosses the state line. It's abandoned now, probably overgrown, but it might still be passable for the pack. The end point is here, deep in the protected wilderness area. Ghost studied the map, its focus intense in a way that seemed impossible for a mere animal. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the wolf was actually reading the map, understanding the geography in the same way a human might. If you follow this route, Michael continued, tracing a line with his finger, you should be able to avoid the main roads and the tracking equipment Baker's men are setting up. The wolf's ears twitched, then it raised its head sharply, looking toward the forest. A moment later, Michael heard it too, the distant sound of an engine approaching. Go, he urged. You need to get back to the pack. Ghost hesitated, looking at Michael with those intelligent amber eyes, a gaze that seemed to hold questions, concerns, perhaps even reluctance to leave. I'll be fine, Michael assured it, though he wasn't entirely convinced himself. Just keep the pack safe. With a final soft whine, Ghost slipped away, disappearing into the underbrush just as the sound of the engine grew louder. Michael quickly hid the journal inside his coat and stood, trying to appear casual as a large SUV with Baker's Ranch logo crested the hill. The SUV stopped at the edge of his property, and Maddox emerged, carrying what looked like technical equipment. He spotted Michael and approached with that same cold, professional demeanor. Morning, Mr. Reeves. Early riser. I like the quiet, Michael replied, keeping his tone neutral. What brings you to my property at dawn? Maddox held up the device in his hand. Acoustic sensor picked up some interesting sounds near your cabin about 20 minutes ago. Thought I'd check it out personally. Michael's stomach tightened, but he kept his face impassive. What kind of sounds? Animal movement. Something large. Maddox's eyes scanned the ground around Michael, then moved to the tree line where Ghost had disappeared. You haven't seen anything unusual this morning, have you? Just the local wildlife. Deer come through pretty regularly. Maddox nodded slowly, clearly unconvinced. Mind if I take a look around? Actually, I do mind, Michael said firmly. As I told you last night, this is private property. Unless you have a warrant, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. For a tense moment, Maddox stared at Michael, clearly weighing his options. Then he shrugged. Of course, just doing my job. He turned to go, then paused. One more thing, Mr. Reeves. Our thermal imaging detected a large heat signature moving from your cabin to the North Forest about 5 minutes ago. Too big for a deer, too small for a bear. Any idea what that might have been? Michael met his gaze steadily. No idea. Interesting. Maddox smiled thinly, because it moved exactly like a wolf. Without waiting for Michael's response, Maddox returned to his vehicle and drove away. Michael watched until the SUV disappeared from view, then let out a long, shaky breath. They had technology capable of detecting Ghost's presence, even in the pre-dawn darkness. The situation was more dangerous than he'd realized. Back inside, Michael spread Blackwood's journals on the table, searching for anything that might help. The old Forest Service road he'd shown Ghost was a start, but the pack would still need to travel miles of monitored terrain before reaching it. And with thermal imaging, motion sensors, and professional trackers on their trail, the odds were stacked against them. He needed a diversion, something to pull Baker's team in the wrong direction while Ghost led the pack to safety. As he flipped through the journals, a passage caught his eye. April 3rd, 1997. An unexpected discovery. The white-marked wolf appears capable of directing other members of its pack to create diversions when threatened. During a confrontation with a rival pack today, the alpha sent two subordinates in opposite directions, drawing the rival's attention while the rest of the pack, including vulnerable pups, retreated safely. The level of strategic thinking this represents is remarkable, not merely instinctive response, but adaptive problem-solving. Michael sat back, an idea forming. If Ghost could coordinate pack movements for tactical advantage, perhaps Michael could provide a similar kind of support, not by directly interfering with Baker's hunt. That would be illegal, but by creating circumstances that might confuse their tracking efforts. His satellite phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Sam. "Michael, Sheriff Dawson is looking for you." Baker's filed formal complaints, and now he's claiming his security team detected wolf activity right at your cabin this morning. Michael's grip tightened on the phone. Baker's turning this into a witch hunt. Maybe, but the sheriff can't ignore formal complaints. He's heading up to your place later today. Thanks for the warning. There's more, Sam said, his voice dropping. Baker's men think they've found the pack's new location. They're setting up a perimeter about 12 miles north of your cabin, near that old abandoned fire tower. They plan to move in tomorrow at dawn. Michael's heart sank. The caves where he'd led the pack. Baker's team had already found them. "You still there?" Sam asked. "Yeah," Michael said, his mind racing. "Thanks for letting me know." After hanging up, Michael paced the cabin, struggling to formulate a plan. If Baker's team moved on the caves tomorrow, they'd find the pack trapped with nowhere to run. The pups would be too slow to escape, and the adult wolves would fight to protect them, a confrontation that could only end in tragedy. The sound of an approaching vehicle interrupted his thoughts. Looking out the window, he saw Sheriff Dawson's SUV pulling up to the cabin. Time had run out. Sheriff Dawson was alone, his expression grim as Michael invited him inside. "Baker's raising hell in town," Dawson said without preamble. "Claims you're harboring wolves, interfering with legal hunting activities. He's even talking about filing criminal charges." "On what grounds?" Michael asked, gesturing for the sheriff to sit. "Destruction of property, for starters. He says you led the wolf pack away from his hunting party to prevent him from protecting his livestock." Dawson sighed, settling into a chair. "It's thin, but given the climate in town right now, I can't just ignore it." "I haven't done anything illegal," Michael stated firmly. "Maybe not. But Baker's security chief showed me thermal imaging from this morning. A wolf-sized heat signature moving from your back door into the forest." Dawson's eyes were sharp, assessing. "Care to explain that?" Michael met his gaze steadily. "Wildlife passes through my property all the time. I can't control what animals do. And the howling Baker claims he heard last night? That wasn't wildlife, was it?" Michael hesitated, weighing his options. The sheriff was no fool. Denials would only erode whatever trust remained between them. "I admire wolves," he said carefully. "Always have. Sometimes I imitate their calls, just to hear if they'll respond. There's no law against that." Dawson observed him silently for a long moment. "You know," he said finally, "my grandfather was half-Ute. Used to tell stories about these mountains, about the creatures that lived here before we built towns and ranches. Said some wolves weren't just animals. They were spirits taking physical form, connecting worlds." Michael stiffened, reminded of Blackwood's journals. "I always thought they were just stories," Dawson continued. But he believed in them completely. Said his father once encountered a spirit wolf with a circle of white fur, like a moon marking. Claimed it saved his life during a blizzard, led him to shelter when he was lost and freezing. Why are you telling me this? Michael asked quietly. Dawson stood, adjusting his hat. Because I think there's more happening here than Baker's complaints or missing livestock. And I think you know exactly what it is. Michael remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. Baker's team is planning to move on a den site tomorrow at dawn, Dawson said, moving toward the door. I don't have the authority to stop them. They have legal permits. But I thought you should know. I appreciate that, Michael said carefully. The sheriff paused at the threshold. One more thing. Baker's men seem very confident about the location they've identified, almost like they were led there intentionally. He fixed Michael with a meaningful look. Wild animals are smarter than most people give them credit for. Sometimes they know when to create a false trail. With that cryptic statement, Dawson left, leaving Michael staring after him. What had the sheriff meant? Was he suggesting the wolves had deliberately misled Baker's trackers? Or was he offering a veiled suggestion? As the sound of the sheriff's vehicle faded, Michael returned to Blackwood's journals with renewed purpose. There had to be something more, some key insight that would help him protect Ghost and the pack. He found it in one of the earliest notebooks. August 19th, 1994. I've discovered something remarkable about wolf communication. They don't just use vocalizations to coordinate with pack members. They employ an intricate system of scent marking to create maps for other wolves to follow. The white-marked wolf appears particularly adept at this, often laying complex trails that double back or split in multiple directions. This isn't random, it's deliberate, strategic. A blueprint for the pack's movements. Invisible to human eyes, but clear as writing to those with the senses to read it. A plan began to form in Michael's mind. If Ghost could create scent trails to direct the pack, perhaps Michael could use the same principle to mislead Baker's trackers, not with scent, but with something their technology could detect: heat signatures. Snow began falling as dusk settled over the mountains, fat flakes drifting lazily from a leaden sky. Michael watched from his porch, the cold air burning his lungs with each breath. Time was running out. By dawn, Baker's team would move on the caves, expecting to find Ghost and the pack. If his plan was going to work, he needed to act tonight. He checked his backpack one last time. Emergency flares, a thermal blanket, rope, a first aid kit, and supplies for what would be a long, cold night in the forest. He dressed in multiple layers, the outer one being his warmest hunting clothes. On his belt hung a hunting knife, not for protection against wolves, but against the elements. The mountains were unforgiving in winter, especially after dark. No one would question a man going for an evening hike on his own property. It was what came next that would raise eyebrows if anyone were watching. Michael waited until full darkness before setting out, following a game trail that led west, away from the caves where Baker's men expected to find the wolves. His breath formed clouds in the cold air as he moved swiftly through the falling snow, alert for any sign of surveillance. After half an hour, he reached the first location he'd marked on his mental map, a small clearing surrounded by dense pines. He pulled the first flare from his pack, ignited it, and drove it into the snow. The bright red light illuminated the clearing, reflecting off snowflakes and creating a heat signature that any thermal imaging would detect from a significant distance. Michael continued west, moving deeper into the forest, occasionally checking his compass to ensure he maintained the correct bearing. At carefully chosen intervals, he lit more flares, creating a trail of heat markers leading away from the caves and toward a different section of the mountains. At the final point, nearly 3 miles from his starting location, Michael spread the thermal blanket on the ground, then lit the remaining flares in a rough circle around it. From above, or through thermal imaging, it would appear as a cluster of warm bodies, gathered in one location. A wolf pack settling in for the night. "Come find me, Baker," he muttered, watching the flares burn against the night sky. Now came the risky part. Michael needed to alert Ghost, to let the wolf know it was time to move the pack along the Forest Service road he'd shown in Blackwood's map. But with Baker's surveillance covering the area, using Blackwood's call might trigger immediate investigation. He'd have to try something more subtle, something that might register as natural wildlife movement rather than human interference. Drawing from one of Blackwood's later journal entries, Michael decided on a modified hunting call, something that might be mistaken for an injured elk if anyone heard it. Taking a deep breath, he let out a low, wavering call that echoed through the trees. He repeated it twice more, then waited, the silence of the forest pressing in around him. Minutes passed, the flares burning lower, casting flickering shadows across the snow. Michael began to worry his message hadn't been received. Then, faintly but unmistakably, a wolf's howl answered from the east, a long note followed by two shorter ones. Ghost's reply. Relief flooded through Michael, followed quickly by concern. If he'd heard the response, Baker's acoustic sensors would have picked it up too. He needed to maintain the diversion until Ghost had time to lead the pack away. He settled down to wait, prepared for a long, cold night. The temperature was dropping rapidly, the snow now coming down in earnest. Michael pulled his coat tighter around himself and hunkered down beneath a pine tree, where the branches offered some shelter from the accumulated snow. His mind drifted to Blackwood's journals, to the biologist's description of dreams shared with the white-marked wolf. Michael had experienced similar dreams since meeting Ghost, but they'd always come unbidden, during sleep. He wondered if it was possible to initiate such a connection consciously, to reach out across that mysterious bridge between their minds. It seemed absurd, yet after everything he'd witnessed, Michael was beyond dismissing possibilities simply because they defied conventional understanding. Closing his eyes, he focused on Ghost, visualizing the silver coat, the distinctive white marking, the intelligent amber eyes. He wasn't sure when consciousness gave way to something else, a state neither fully awake nor truly asleep. The forest around him seemed to shift, colors becoming sharper, sounds more distinct. He could smell things he shouldn't have been able to detect. The musk of a rabbit hidden beneath the snow a dozen yards away, the lingering scent of a fox that had passed hours earlier. And suddenly, he wasn't alone in his mind. A presence joined him, wild, ancient, yet somehow familiar. He felt Ghost's consciousness touch his own, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. There were no words, no clear images, only impressions. The pack moving through darkness, pups carried in the jaws of adult wolves, the black mate leading while Ghost lingered behind, maintaining the connection with Michael. He sensed Ghost's gratitude, concern, and something deeper, a recognition of the bond that had formed between them, unexpected yet undeniable. Then a sharp crack jolted Michael back to full awareness. He opened his eyes to see one of the flares sputtering out, its chemical fuel nearly exhausted. The others had already died, leaving only the thermal blanket reflecting what little heat remained. How long had he been in that trance-like state? Michael checked his watch, alarmed to see that nearly 3 hours had passed. The snow had accumulated around him, and the temperature had dropped dangerously. He shivered, suddenly aware of how cold he'd become. He needed to move, to generate heat before hypothermia set in. Stiffly, Michael rose to his feet, stamping to restore circulation. As he gathered his supplies, a new sound reached him, the distant rumble of engines. Headlights appeared through the trees, moving along an old logging road below his position. Baker's team had taken the bait. They were following his false trail, drawn by the heat signatures he'd created. Michael felt a surge of satisfaction, quickly tempered by the knowledge that his deception wouldn't last long. Once they reached the clearing and found nothing but dying flares and a thermal blanket, they'd realized they'd been tricked. He needed to move, to put distance between himself and this location before Baker's men discovered the ruse. But as Michael shouldered his pack, a wave of dizziness washed over him. The cold had affected him more than he'd realized. His extremities felt numb, his coordination compromised. "Not good," he muttered, forcing himself to start walking. The snow made navigation difficult, obscuring landmarks he'd recognized on the way in. He consulted his compass, trying to orient himself toward home, but the dizziness returned, stronger this time. Michael stumbled, catching himself against a tree trunk. He needed to rest, just for a moment. Leaning against the tree, he closed his eyes, fighting against the encroaching fatigue that he recognized as a dangerous symptom of hypothermia. "Can't stop here," he told himself firmly. "Keep moving." But his body refused to cooperate. The hours in the cold had drained his strength, and the momentary rest only made it harder to continue. He slid down the trunk, landing in the snow with a soft thump. Just a few minutes, he thought. Just enough to gather his strength. Even as the rational part of his mind screamed warnings, his eyes closed, consciousness slipping away despite his best efforts to remain awake. The sensation of something warm and solid pressing against his side roused Michael from his dangerous sleep. His eyelids felt heavy, crusted with ice, but he forced them open. Night still enveloped the forest, but the snow had stopped falling. The clouds had cleared, revealing a field of stars overhead. A soft whine drew his attention. Turning his head, Michael found himself staring into familiar amber eyes. Ghost was pressed against him, the wolf's body heat helping to ward off the lethal cold. On his other side, another warm presence, the black wolf, Ghost's mate, adding its warmth to the effort. "You came back," Michael whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why?" Ghost nudged him gently, then looked toward the trees. There, standing a short distance away, were the other wolves of the pack. Even the pups were present, watching with curious eyes from the safety of the group. Understanding dawned slowly through Michael's hypothermia-clouded mind. Ghost hadn't just returned for him. It had brought the entire pack. They had come back for him, risking their safety to save his life, just as he had risked his to save theirs. With the wolves' warmth helping to revive him, Michael managed to struggle to his feet. Ghost and its mate flanked him, supporting his weight when he stumbled. The rest of the pack moved ahead, creating a path through the snow. They were leading him home, Michael realized. Somehow, Ghost had understood the danger he was in and had guided the pack back from their journey to safety to rescue him. The going was slow. Michael's limbs were still numb, his coordination poor. But the wolves were patient, adjusting their pace to accommodate his limitations. When he needed to rest, they huddled around him, sharing their warmth. When he was ready to continue, they guided him forward, choosing the easiest path through the difficult terrain. As they traveled, Michael felt that connection again, the bridge between his mind and Ghost's. It was stronger now, more defined. He sensed the wolf's determination, its unwavering focus on bringing him to safety. And beneath that, something that could only be described as affection, a genuine care that transcended the boundaries between species. Dawn was breaking by the time they reached the edge of the clearing that surrounded Michael's cabin. The wolves stopped at the tree lean, unwilling to venture into the open space. In the distance, Michael could see Sheriff Dawson's SUV parked in his driveway. The sheriff himself stood on the porch, knocking on the door. "He's looking for me," Michael said softly. Ghost nudged his leg, urging him forward. Michael understood he needed to go alone from here. The wolves couldn't risk being seen, especially not with Baker's team still in the area. "Thank you," he said, meeting Ghost's intelligent gaze. "For everything." The silver wolf held his gaze for a long moment, then turned to rejoin the pack. Before disappearing into the trees, Ghost looked back once more, a silent farewell that Michael felt as keenly as any spoken goodbye. He watched until the last flicker of silver fur vanished among the pines, then turned and began making his way across the clearing. Sheriff Dawson spotted him immediately, hurrying to meet him halfway. "Reeves, where the hell have you been?" Dawson called, concern evident in his voice. "You look half frozen." "Long story," Michael managed, his voice rough from cold and exhaustion. The sheriff helped him to the cabin, noting his condition with a professional eye. "You need medical attention. Hypothermia, from the looks of it." Inside, Dawson built up the fire while Michael changed into dry clothes. Wrapped in blankets with a mug of hot coffee in his hand, Michael began to feel human again, the dangerous chill receding from his core. "Baker's men were chasing shadows all night," Dawson said conversationally, settling into a chair across from Michael. "Someone led them on quite a chase, heat signatures, false trails. They're still out there, combing the wrong section of the mountains entirely." Michael didn't respond, simply sipping his coffee. "Funny thing," the sheriff continued. "While Baker's team was distracted, game cameras on the eastern border of the county picked up some interesting footage. A pack of wolves moving along that old Forest Service road that crosses into the protected wilderness area." Michael tensed, but Dawson raised a hand reassuringly. "Don't worry. Those cameras are maintained by the State Wildlife Service, not Baker. Their footage goes to researchers studying migration patterns. By the time Baker finds out, those wolves will be deep in protected territory, where his hunting permits don't apply." "They made it," Michael whispered, relief washing over him. Dawson studied him thoughtfully. "What I can't figure out is why they came back. Those cameras showed the pack crossing the border around midnight. Then, 3 hours later, they reappeared, heading back into our county. Finally, just before dawn, they crossed over again, this time for good." Michael looked into his coffee, unsure how to respond. "Almost like they came back for something," Dawson mused. "Or someone." Their eyes met, and Michael saw understanding in the sheriff's gaze, not judgment or skepticism, but recognition of something extraordinary. "My grandfather would have called it a blessing," Dawson said quietly. "To be chosen by a spirit wolf." Michael said nothing, but he didn't need to. The sheriff nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "Baker will be furious when he realizes the wolves are gone for good. He'll look for someone to blame." "Let him," Michael said, surprising himself with the calm certainty in his voice. "I haven't broken any laws." "No, you haven't," Dawson agreed, standing to leave. "But a word of advice, Baker's not the type to let things go. It might be a good time for a vacation. Maybe visit some national parks, see some wildlife." He smiled slightly. "Yellowstone is beautiful this time of year. Lots of protected wolves up there." After the sheriff left, Michael stood on his porch, looking out over the snow-covered mountains that had been his sanctuary for the past 3 years. Since losing his arm, he had hidden himself away, convinced that his life was over, that nothing meaningful remained for him. Ghost had changed that. The connection they'd formed had awakened something in Michael that he thought had died in the accident, a sense of purpose, of belonging to something larger than himself. 1 week later, Michael's truck was packed with essentials, clothes, personal items, and most importantly, Blackwood's journals. Baker had made good on the sheriff's prediction, filing complaints and making thinly veiled threats around town. It was time for a strategic retreat, at least until the situation cooled down. As he prepared to leave, Michael took one last walk to the edge of the forest behind his cabin. The snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of brown earth beneath. Spring wasn't far off, bringing new growth, new beginnings. He stood silently, remembering. The wounded wolf on his porch during the blizzard. The intelligent eyes that seemed to understand his words. The dreams of running through the forest. The night journey leading the pack to safety. The bridge between worlds. "Goodbye, Ghost," he said softly to the empty forest. "Take care of your family." That night, in a motel room halfway to Yellowstone, Michael dreamed. He was running through moonlit forests, power surging through 4 strong legs, the scents of pine and earth filling his nostrils. Ahead of him, A silver wolf turned to look back, that distinctive white circle around its ear catching the moonlight. In the dream, Ghost waited for him to catch up, then continued forward, leading him through unfamiliar territory. They crested a ridge, and below stretched a vast valley, rimmed by mountains. Yellowstone, home to the largest protected wolf population in the country. The silver wolf looked at him, those intelligent amber eyes conveying a message without words. This isn't goodbye. It's just distance. When Michael woke, the connection lingered, more vivid than ever before. He understood now what Blackwood had discovered, what indigenous people had known for centuries. Some bonds transcended physical proximity, spanning miles, perhaps even time itself. As he continued his journey north the next morning, Michael felt a sense of anticipation rather than loss. He was moving towards something, not away. Ghost and the pack were safe in the protected wilderness, but the bridge between them remained intact, a connection that neither distance nor circumstance could sever. One day, perhaps, their paths would cross again in the physical world. Until then, they would share the dreamscape where a one-armed man could run on four legs and a silver wolf with a circle of white around its ear could communicate across the boundary between species. 6 months later, Michael stood on the observation deck at Lamar Valley, Yellowstone's famous wolf-watching location. Summer had transformed the landscape into a lush, verdant paradise, so different from the snow-covered mountains of his Colorado home. He'd settled into a small cabin near the park's eastern entrance, taking a position as a consultant for the Yellowstone Wolf Project. His background in veterinary medicine, combined with his unique perspective on wolf behavior, made him valuable to the researchers studying the park's packs. Michael hadn't told them about Ghost, about the silver wolf with the white-marked ear and the impossible intelligence. Some things weren't meant to be shared with science, to be categorized and studied. Some mysteries were meant to remain just that, mysteries, whispers between worlds that defied conventional understanding. Through his spotting scope, Michael scanned the distant meadow where a recently documented pack had been sighted. The wolves moved with that same fluid grace he remembered, hunting, playing, living their wild lives in protected territory. None had silver fur, but he hadn't expected to see Ghost here. The connection they shared told him the wolf was still in Colorado, still leading its pack through the wilderness area where they had found sanctuary. "First time watching wolves?" an older man asked, stepping up beside Michael at the railing. Michael smiled. "No, but it never gets old." "True enough." The man nodded appreciatively. "Been studying them 40 years now, and they still surprise me." Something in the man's voice caught Michael's attention. He turned to look more closely at his companion, mid-70s, weathered face, keen eyes that missed nothing. There was something familiar about him, though Michael was certain they'd never met. "I'm Thomas," the man said, extending his hand. "Thomas Blackwood." Michael's heart skipped a beat, his mind flashing to the journals hidden in his cabin, to the stories of the silver wolf with the white-marked ear written 3 decades earlier. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Blackwood chuckled. "Maybe I have," Michael replied, shaking the man's hand. "My name is Michael Reeves, and I think we might have a mutual friend." Blackwood's eyes widened slightly, then crinkled with a knowing smile. "Silver coat, white circle around one ear. Intelligence that can't be explained by conventional science." "Yes," Michael whispered. "How did you know I'd be here?" "I didn't," Blackwood replied simply. "But Ghost did." As the sun set over Lamar Valley, the howl of distant wolves echoed across the landscape, a sound as ancient as the mountains themselves, bridging the gap between wilderness and civilization, between human and wolf, between worlds that were perhaps never meant to be separate at all.